Hey, welcome back everybody. Jeff Frick here, coming to you from the Humanoids Summit 2024. It's the inaugural Humanoid Summit here at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California. What a great place to be. Apparently it's the largest collection of humanoid robots ever assembled in a single place. I'm sure the internet will check my facts on that, but that's my understanding. And we're excited for our next guest to talk about something that's maybe not as sexy as some of the other topics, but certainly something that's super, super important. So welcoming in, we have Aaron Prather. He's the Director of Robotics and Autonomous Systems for ASTM International. Aaron, great to see you.
Great to see you.
Yeah, so you're just coming off a panel discussion.
Yep.
What is ASTM International, for those that aren't familiar?
ASTM International is like one of the oldest standards organizations on the planet. We just celebrated our 125th anniversary.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you. Only IEEE is older than us, and I think they only beat us out by 5 years. But we were actually born out of the railroad industry. The railroad industry is like the only way we're going to grow as an industry is we got to standardize. So we're all working together in this, where trains can go across the country on the same type of track. And over 125 years, we are in numerous industries, over 100 industries, over 13,000 published standards. We have 30,000 volunteers working on all these standards, and I just get to focus on the robotics side of it. But it's a great organization, and actually we borrow and learn from these other industries of how we might have pathways forward for robotics when it comes to standard. So it's a great organization to work for, and we're here to help the robotics industry grow.
Right. So before we get into the specifics on robotics, let's talk about standards. You know, we just assume that a train can go from one track to another track, but in fact, it's not how these things get started. And without standards, this interoperability, which opens up all kinds of opportunity, doesn't exist. Yep. So how do standards get started?
I mean, standards actually come from the industry itself. We work with folks, but we're also always asking questions of what do you need? What are the challenges you're trying to overcome? And if we start hearing stories of, I need this to make sure I can prove to my customers I'm safe or I am performing in a certain way, we need to put those together. So it's actually then, as soon as we discover the problem, it's then building a team of experts from numerous parts of the ecosystem to start then putting pen to paper and actually writing a standard that everyone can agree to. It then goes to a vote. It has to pass, just like anything going like through Congress or a legislature. And if it's passed and accepted by the industry, it will become a published standard that is out there now for everyone to use.
Okay, so you vote on it. So talk about doing some research for this. I saw one of your presentations, and you talked about the difference between laws, regulations, and standards. Yep. How should people think about those three things?
Think of standards as the first baseline. This is where an industry standard has been developed by subject matter experts that understand the technology that's being discussed, what the problems are, and it's a general consistent standard. It's a bit voluntary though. So you can use it or you don't have to use it. However, now go up a step to a regulation. Say OSHA is very worried about robot safety in a factory. If an injury happens, heaven forbid, OSHA is going to look at the setup of that cell, and they're going to actually then look at the standard and like, why didn't you follow the standard? If you followed the standard, you would have been fine. And then, so what OSHA could do is, under a general duties clause, cite you and penalize you, and then say you should have followed the standard. Now go up the next level, where the standard becomes law. And this is what happens in the EU, where the EU is literally taking some standards from ISO and other standards groups and literally just turning them into a flat out law. And it's actually probably a good law because it's based off of folks that actually know what they're talking about. It's not a bureaucrat, it's not a politician writing the law if they're referring back to the standard. And ultimately what we don't want is we don't want politicians making laws that aren't based on any kind of standard, because those don't always work because the industry doesn't really even accept them, but now they're being held to them by a law, and the law is the ultimate enforcement.
And how much interplay is there between you, the standards body and the industry in terms of either proposing them, trying to come to some agreement? Are there often a lot of forking? How do things like open source and some of these things play in where there's an active community? You guys are trying to put some frameworks around it. How does that interaction work?
It's very complex, and this is why I have a job, is to help coordinate those efforts. So we work with our fellow standards development organizations, SDOs, so we work closely with ISO and UL and IEEE and the UL, but also we work with organizations like A3, which is the robotics industry pretty much trade group. And they actually have their own standards development group, which is tied to ANSI, but it is this coordination of efforts, and we all work together. I have sat in on UL calls, they have sat on my calls, and it is a lot of coordination, but this is how we make sure there's no duplication of efforts, where we have two organizations working pretty much on the same thing. We don't want to do that, but also it's knowing what has to be done and what's the quickest path to it. A safety standard might go much faster through ANSI or ISO, a test and performance standard might go faster through ASTM and UL. So it's also how do we coordinate efforts to make sure we're cranking these out as quickly as possible.
And then if you're, for robotics specifically, right, you're a robotics startup, you got some idea, you're working in the garage, you're trying to get this thing going, how do you know what the standards are? How do you engage with industry, especially like startups and stuff that aren't necessarily directly connected or don't necessarily even have the experience to know where to go? How does that work?
I mean, they are a difficult group to reach, and that's why I come to these kind of conferences, because I'm trying to meet them where they're at. And the flip side is hopefully also we're reaching out to those mentors. We're talking to the VCs. Having a VC that knows how the standards organizations work, then they're one of our voices for us. So it is trying to build that ecosystem of just knowledge.
Right.
You might not be a standards organization yourself, but you know how to get involved. And hopefully we're passing that knowledge on to those startups. But it is a hard thing. This is why we're very active on social media. That's why we're always putting out newsletters. We are trying to get our message out to reach those folks, because the earlier the startups actually get involved in the standards making, the faster we actually get them to market. I think one of the great success stories is Agility Robotics, Digit. My first experience with them was at a standards meeting, and I literally had to say, "Who are you?" And we're like, "Oh, we're this little startup, and we're going to make this legged robot, and we want to be involved in standards making." And that was 5+ years ago, and now look at where they're at. Digits was on the cover of Time magazine.
Right.
Digits being deployed. And I think a lot of that does go back to they got involved in standards early on and really helped us develop a framework that allowed them to deploy much faster.
I was going to say, because, well, he was at Oregon State, right? So
Yeah.
I would imagine academic institutions are a great
Yep.
conduit for you. But also then I would imagine it would inform a lot of design decisions that if you can incorporate those earlier in
Yes.
your design process versus having to put them in later and screw something else up, probably a huge advantage to bake that stuff in early.
It is, it's a huge advantage. And the whole thing is when then they go talk to potential customers, a lot of them are going to go talk to some big players. Those big players already have in their corporate policies that they must be in compliance with various standards or standards organizations. So if you're now that startup saying, "Oh yeah, my robot's safe," you might get hit with a standards question in the interview of like, "Okay, well, what standard are you in compliance with?" And if you can't answer that, you might not get the sale.
Right.
I mean, being able to talk intelligently about the standards and how you employ them yourselves, and even being honest of like, there's not a standard for this yet, but look how I've used this standard and this standard to at least get me halfway there, because these technologies are going so fast. Being able to talk intelligently about standards to customers not only makes them feel more comfortable that you know what you're doing, but then they can also reference those back and saying, "Oh, this is why they're in compliance," because they can look at the standard themselves.
Right.
For it.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about robotics specifically, and I think chapters, or I can't remember how you subset them out, but there's standards around manufacturers of robotics,
Yep.
And then integrators of robotics. But now you're talking about this thing in users, and if you think of a factory setting, a lot of these things are kind of roped off, or they have their special area, and there's, people don't go in those areas, so it seems pretty clear about what it does and how you bolt it in. we're here at Humanoids Summit. One of the biggest applications are elder care, whether that's in an institution or at home, and then just the home.
Yeah.
So how do you see the standards evolving in that new kind of bucket, which is the end users of these things, which is a lot more difficult to access, control, define? How are you approaching that problem?
I mean, it's going to take a big effort. Now, the good thing is we can take elements of other standards. So for the mobility, we can look at existing mobility standards of just detect and avoid. Can you detect an object and can you avoid it? Good, you passed that. Now, how on grasping and all that, there are some test standards on that coming up. So it's slowly building each one of these, and the humanoids are going to touch so many things. We're going to have to literally break down each element of a humanoid of, okay, what do we need here? What do we need here? So there's a lot of work to be done. We need more folks involved in this. We need more researchers, not just doing research for research, but research to standards. We need strong research that actually becomes a standard. And the best example of this is when we did collaborative robots. We leaned heavily on a study, a research study from Germany that actually showed thresholds of how much force can you put on a person without them becoming too uncomfortable. We're about to update that standard with new research from Korea, Korea is a leading nation in robotics, so that research is very rich, and it's going to help us elevate it next. So we need more of those researchers doing that to actually give us hard data of what are those thresholds we need to address. And when it comes to healthcare and picking up people and all that, we're talking about a very intimate situation,
right?
And you don't want to hurt them. You want them to be comfortable. You don't want to panic them. Okay, that's a lot of research I just mentioned right there of like, how do we address each one of those? So this is why we just need more researchers working on these problems so we can actually create a standard so we can help everything get to market.
It was amazing. I was watching a couple of your videos getting ready for this, and the specificity in the tests that you guys create to make the standard, and even the objects in the test. And if you're going to, you talk about avoidance, avoidance means, you got to have this kind of track, and you're going to have this in its way, and you're going to have a chair, and the chair looks like this. You guys get really specific in both the definitions of the standard, but also how to execute it, how to set it up, how to do the test.
Yep.
Really get deep into it.
Yeah, and that's so you can just set up one of the tests in your lab and benchmark your robot. If you're building a robot and you want to say, okay, let me go get this standard that I think is going to apply to me, run your own test, benchmark your robot, do some tinkering, run it back through the test. Did it improve? Did it not? This is another aspect of standards, is to actually help you build a better robot over and over again. And that's why we give you those details. And we also make sure that what we're asking you to build can be built. We don't try and put anything fancy in there. I always try and tell the guys that are writing the standards, says, I should be able to get everything that you put in this test at Walmart or Home Depot or Lowe's. And if I can do that and go build my own kit, then that's going to make it more powerful. But the whole thing is we also want some independent labs doing these kind of tests too, because ultimately if folks are going to want to go to certification, that's what it's going to take, is you're going to have to give your baby robot to an independent lab and let them run the test without you in the room.
But you're going to know what the test is because the test is very well defined.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so the other word in your title is autonomous.
Yes.
Autonomous cars, I've been in the Waymo. I don't know if you've been in the Waymo yet. It's a pretty miraculous experience on all kinds of levels. How do you start to think about autonomy? Because there's a huge debate even within like ChatGPT. Does it really know what it's talking about, or it's just, it's making its best guess to try to make you feel happy? Hallucinations in a bad response on text is one thing.
Yeah.
Hallucinations, if you say unpack the grocery bag and the thing starts going bananas, is a whole different thing. So how do you guys think about autonomy?
I mean, autonomy is going to be the next real big challenge, and we are having those conversations of like, how do you even test for some of this stuff? Because you talk to a lot of the researchers, like, we put all this data in and it spits it out, and we don't know why.
Right.
We have no idea. So there are some of the first steps we're doing is standards around your test data. Was it ethically collected? Are you diverse enough in your test data where you're not creating your own blind spots? Are you training the data ethically and in a format that others can repeat? And I think that will be the first test that you'll start seeing from numerous SDOs. I know UL is probably going to launch one. Our friends at NIST and DC are going to do one. But it's so much in that black box that we haven't cracked yet. It is, okay, what can we test? What can we measure? And the data, I think, is going to be the first one we're going to go after. And I think there's already a lot of work in that area.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, explainable AI and an audit trail, and like you say, repeatability, because the models are so big and complex to begin with, and then they're getting new data all the time, and then they're generating new stuff and evolving all the time. That, repeatability and saying, how did you come up with the answer that you just gave me? They don't often not really sure.
Yeah, and this is why, going back to what we talked about earlier, of why we need researchers to start sort of shifting some of their focus of, we understand that you're trying to make the models better and better and better, but can you even just come up with a test for us first before we go way down this path? And we are starting to see some researchers take that seriously, because they're even starting to get confused of what are these results?
Right.
And so I think we're going to see more and more researchers go back to, we need to start developing some test methods. And then with that research, I can then take that and elevate it into a standard and tell regulatory and politicians, hey, stay back. We're developing it. It's coming. Just don't do anything terrible like the EU did.
And I want to close with again, getting ready for this in one of your presentations, talked about really inviting people to get involved. You don't want to be this kind of a black box organization that just comes up with these rules and regulations, but really inviting people to get involved, especially in these cutting edge things. So for the folks out there, how can they get involved? Where should they get involved if they want to help define the standards for all these new cutting edge technologies? How do they get involved with you guys?
Yeah, feel free to reach out to us. ASTM, are on numerous channels, and if you go to any of our help pages saying, I want to join your efforts, you will be directed to me or to Nora, my staff manager, or start attending some of these meetings with A3. We've just each year there's a robot safety conference where you want to talk about standards for 3 days straight, that's where you go. And that conference keeps growing bigger and bigger each year, so it shows that there are folks out there. But reach out to any of us and tell us what you want to work on, what you're passionate. And if that's something ASTM works on, I'll gladly bring you into my world. But if it's something that's more UL aligned, SAE aligned, IEEE aligned, I will gladly send you to them, because we're all looking for experts.
Right.
But we also want the experts that are going to be working on the stuff that is the focus at that time. And sometimes that becomes a problem, but the whole thing is getting involved is the first step. And just reach out to us and we will get you set up.
Right, and it gets really micro kind of focused too. You can really get down into a specialty. You guys keep breaking the problem down, breaking the problem down.
Yeah, and so the whole thing is you might not think that you have value that you can bring, but if you talk to us and I'll ask you, like, what are you passionate about? What do you like working on? And I will start thinking of where you're best plugged in, and if I can't, trust me, I'll find a place eventually for you. But it is just reach out to us and we'll get started.
Yeah, well, I think your job security is good. I don't know if you've been there for 125 years, but I think you got a mission and a constantly evolving, challenging landscape ahead.
Yep.
So thanks for all your hard work and being so open to input and engaging with the community. I think that's really important.
Thank you for having me.
All right, he's Aaron, I'm Jeff. We're at the Humanoids Summit 2024. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Take care.